This is the Mind the Gap podcast, episode 3. Hello, I'm Dr. Brandon Pardekooper.
And I am Pastor Matt Wozbinski.
And this is Mind the Gap, a podcast designed to help ministry leaders like you fill the gap between your ministry training and your week-to-week experience. Hey, Matt, how's it going?
It is going well. I don't know if you knew this, but baseball season is officially underway. And by that, I mean someone is throwing a baseball somewhere in Florida. So pretty excited about that.
You're right. I had no idea.
Yeah. I mean, you like other sports like football or whatever, but we all know the true American sport of baseball is really what matters. And so
I'm still basking in the glory of the Super Bowl win. So
yeah, I mean, I would just be happy with a win of any kind in general. All my teams are terrible, so I can't get mad at you for that. But besides that, I'm excited that baseball is starting, but that kind of makes my week a little bit better. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm with you. I'm ready for spring. I'm ready for a little bit warmer weather. My kids are done with being cooped up in the house. And so, but other than that, we're doing good. We're doing
awesome.
Good. Yeah. So tonight we are going to talk about how to say no to your lead pastor. Now, this is a touchy subject. And I think that as I'm saying that, all the lead pastors just kind of took a big deep breath in.
Unsubscribe.
And all the staff pastors just leaned in and turned up the volume a little bit. So for you, Matt, do you think this is a worthwhile topic for us to discuss with our Mind the Gap audience?
Absolutely. I think that one of the big things that really makes this such an important topic is, especially in church culture, there's just so much talk about respect and authority and spiritual authority, which is all good and all biblical and all true. But I think that sometimes, especially as youth pastors, staff pastors, we can really get caught up in where is that line and where's that gray area between this is my superior, which I believe God has placed in a place of authority, versus I'm being asked to do something that I think is either a bad idea or that makes me uncomfortable or whatever the reason for your no might be. Mm-hmm. And we believe that there's a healthy way to do that.
Right.
While you should try to, say yes as much as possible, there is a healthy way to say no. And I think sometimes in the church world especially, that can kind of get missed because we don't want to be insubordinate or we don't want to be disrespectful. So I think it's healthy to talk about it. So then when we do need to say no, that we're doing it in a healthy way, in an appropriate way.
Right. Well, and in fact, when I was doing research for the Mind the Gap podcast and really just kind of asking people, if you were to choose the topics that we were to talk about on the podcast, what would you want us to cover? And this was probably the number one topic that came up from pastors of all different phases in ministry and all over the country. And it was very eye-opening for me to realize that how big of a topic this really is. And I feel like, even tonight's podcast is really just going to be the tip of the iceberg on the topic. And I think it's something we can come back to multiple times in the future and kind of peel back some of the layers as we go. And so I think this is just kind of the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we're actually going to split up this in particular topic into two parts. So kind of view this as a part 1 and a part 2. So part 1 tonight, we're going to talk specifically about if you have to say no to what we're calling a reasonable ask. That there's nothing inappropriate about it. There's nothing where it's even a bad idea. Your pastor just wants you to do something that you just maybe can't do. And you need to communicate that you can't do it for whatever reason. And we're going to go through some reasons where that's acceptable and how to do that. And then next week, we're going to touch on maybe a little bit more of the serious topic where it's more of, okay, what might happen if this is going to be bad? Like if your lead pastor is asking you to do something that's unreasonable, if it's a bad idea that you think is going to set you up for failure, or maybe even land you in jail or get fired. And so those are what we're going to touch on next week. But this week, we're going to talk specifically about a good ask, but just something that you have to say no to. So Brandon, have you ever had a lead pastor or a superior or someone that you've had to say no to in ministry before?
I did. So there was one that really came to mind. So I was right out of Bible college. My first, it wasn't even really a position. It was more of an internship And the situation was, so I had been there a week or so. The church that I was at had a huge small group system. And this was before small groups were really even a big deal, before everybody was doing them. But they had a really huge small group system. And the lead pastor and the associate pastor both wanted me and the other intern to make sure that we made it to a couple small groups. Well, it had been a week and I hadn't been to one yet. And so we had just finished up playing a softball game. And so, it's summertime and played softball. I'm all sweaty and I don't, when I play, I get super dirty. And, and so after the game, the associate pastor came up to me and he said, "Hey, I want you to head on over to this small group. It started about a half an hour ago and I want you to head on over." And in my mind, I was thinking, I'm sweaty and dirty. I don't know any of these people. I'm going to show up a half an hour late. Like, this doesn't make any sense to me. Mm-hmm. And I essentially said that. I was like, I just don't think that's I'll be happy to go next week or go to another one tomorrow night or go into later tonight. Or, I had a lot of different options that I was giving. And I essentially said, I'm just not comfortable doing that because I've never met any of these people. I'm a half hour late and I look a mess. And so I'm just not going. Yeah. And it didn't, as you can imagine, it didn't go well. And, things were, a little rocky there afterwards. And so, yeah, that was the one big one that definitely came to mind when I was thinking about this. So what about you, Matt? Have you ever had to?
Yes. So mine's also a bad example. So please learn from our mistakes.
Yes,
I was interning with 7 student ministries at the Oaks. And my memory fades a little bit, probably just to make myself sound a little better. But I'm pretty sure what had happened was we had to do this big mailer. And to this day, we will joke about this mailer. So it's one of those things where we can look back and laugh at it now, but it was not a laughing matter at the time, where very large youth group. And so we were probably having to send out close to maybe 1,000 information packets or cards about something. And so me and my friend JC were interns and we had to send out this mailer, but something happened where we did something wrong and we had to organize them by like postal code or something along those lines. And we had done it in alphabetical order or something like that. So we have 1,000 letters and this is all happening right before we go on break. So I believe JC and I were planning on driving back up north. He's from Wisconsin. I'm from Michigan. We're down in Texas. And I was just done. I wanted to see my family. And the person who was our superior at the time, we're on the phone with him. And he's like, "Hey, you just need to stay there. It's like late at night. You need to stay there, wait until the post office opens in the morning, and then go there, explain the situation, figure it out, because these need to go out." And he was out of town. And I'm thinking, I'm 19 years old at the time. And I'm thinking, I'm going to go home and see my family. I'm not going to stick around. Like, we have a 20-hour drive in front of us. I'm not going to stay here. So then to send these out, I said, they're all sealed. Somebody else can take care of it. I don't care who does it. They're all sealed. They're all stamped. They're all ready to go. Someone in the morning will just have to take them. And I told him that I was not staying and we ended up leaving. And I remember like not knowing if I was going to come back to a job or not, because like, it was like, he was like, "You are staying, like this is your job." And I said, "There is no way I am staying." And so now water under the bridge, it all worked itself out, but it was something that I did not handle it very well. And even though I was in a situation where I felt like I had to say no, I was pretty stern about it. And I was pretty, well, you're just going to have to deal with it instead of trying to present maybe some solutions. And so that was something that, like I said, nowadays, like we'll still randomly text each other about like mailers and have a good laugh about it. But that was one time where it was this big thing where I said no, but I probably said it in a not the best way.
Nice. Classic. Mm-hmm. Okay. So now I want to be clear for all of our listeners. I want to be clear on the outset. It's not a good idea to tell your pastor no. And there's, let me just give a few reasons why. For you as a pastor, as a staff pastor, when you say no, it violates your mindset as a servant leader. When you say no, then you begin to realize, I can say no. And if you're not careful, it goes unchecked. You kind of violate that servant mentality that you want to have in ministry. At the same time, it also violates that leadership structure of the church that you're under. You have signed on, whether in our cases it was as interns or if you're a staff pastor, you've signed on to be a part of that leadership structure of the church. And so when you start to say no, well, then you start to violate that structure of leadership and the authority of that structure. And then finally, it also violates your lead pastor's trust in you, or your whoever your direct report is, whoever that is. When you start to say no, for right or for wrong, it violates that trust that you have, that relational connection you have. There's now something there that's probably going to fester, probably going to become difficult. In my case, it actually did make things worse. In your case, you were able to reconcile over time. And so, you just have to know that it's really not a good idea to tell your lead pastor no. And what we're going to talk about tonight is more about saying no without necessarily saying no, finding ways to deal with the situation without directly saying, no, I'm not going to do that, and moving on, because that's just not a good way to handle a situation at all. And so that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about how to say no without actually saying no. And so again, remember, in this episode, we're talking about your lead pastor or your direct report has come to you with a reasonable ask, something that is reasonable for you to do, but because of a resource or a talent or some other reason, you're just unable to do that. And so the first thing we want to look at is the resource of time.
Yeah. So one of the big things and one of the main reasons I find myself saying no is just time. There's only so many hours in a day. There's only so much that you can do. And so a lot of times when I find myself having to say no, it's because something has become urgent in my superior's schedule that I had not been kind of privy to. I had not been planning on during my day, and I'm in a meeting and suddenly they get a phone call or something comes up, and now there's a task that needs to be done and it gets put on my plate.
Right.
So one of the things that really will help you say no is to really know what's already on your plate. A lot of times, especially kind of my area is youth pastors, and we are a very unorganized bunch sometimes. We can kind of have a lot of really good ideas and a lot of really good plans, but it's really helpful to already know what's on your plate, to know what your plan is going into the day, going into the week, and having that actually mapped out, even in a tangible way. I've found that if you can have something, whether it's through a Wunderlist, or I use Microsoft To Do, or a Google Calendar, or just a written out in a moleskin notebook, a to-do list, or a checklist of some kind, have your schedule mapped out of what you want to accomplish for that day and for that week. That can mean so much, because then what can happen is you can go to your pastor and say, hey, I want to say yes to this. Actually, you can say yes to this and say, yes, I would love to go and do that hospital visit, or I would love to go and clean up the kids' auditorium because it's a mess and it needs to get done. But here's what I was planning on doing today. What can I do to kind of what can I take off my plate and push down? What is a higher priority, or what is a lower priority that I can bump on down? And so what you're doing in that case is you're giving them that option of, hey, if this is really mission critical, if this is very important and it needs to get done, what can I kind of take off of my plate to be able to? And most pastors and most good leaders will say, oh no, you're already kind of, stuffed to the gills. You're already really full. I'll find someone else to do. Because a lot of times those asks might come out of something where you're just the best available body and you're someone that's in close contact with them and you're someone who's reliable and trustworthy. So they just go to you. But then they might not have considered, oh yeah, you have meetings and you have this and you have that going on all day. And so the more that you
walked in the office that moment.
Exactly. You're just a warm body who is right there and was willing to jump in. And so the more that you can have that stuff mapped out, the more that you can say, I would love to do that, but here's what I have. And then also it helps you kind of map that out. I can't do that right now, but I can do it tomorrow. Is it okay if this waits until tomorrow? I have some free time after 3:00 tomorrow where I can definitely knock out that graphic, or I can definitely make that phone call. And what it does is that communicates and it shows that you're organized in that thought process.
Right.
And another really good thing is having a team that you can delegate to, because great leaders, one of the things that Ashley and I, when we were in youth ministry, realized is that we needed to invest in leaders, because based off of, not to sound like an ego or anything, but based off of just pure skill and talent, a good quality leader can run a youth group of 20 to 30 people, no problem.
Right.
Just because you just know how the system runs. But if you want to go above that, you need to invest in leaders and you need to invest in other people, so then you can multiply yourself. And so if you have a team that you can delegate to, and all of a sudden these tasks are coming from your superior, if you have someone that you can say, I can do that because I have people that I can delegate to. Hey, can you make these phone calls to these 10 people? Absolutely. And then you bring someone on board and say, hey, can you make these 5 phone calls? And I can make 5 phone calls. And then you just cut your time in half. So if you have a really good team that you can delegate to, that'll really save your time and allow you to say yes instead of saying no.
Right. Well, and you kind of touched on it too. You touched on having your schedule mapped out and knowing what's on your plate. What I would add to that is making sure that you're thinking months in advance. So you're not just thinking about what's happening this week or even this month, but you're thinking about what's happening this semester or this quarter or these next 6 months, however your cycle at the church runs. Because if you have open space, somebody will fill it, whether it's your lead pastor or someone else. Someone's going to fill that. And so if you build your own structure for your ministry or your department or whatever you're over, if you build in your own structure, then it just makes it easier to not have to react to the randomness of your lead pastor or anybody else that may want to take your time. Because again, if you have free time, someone will happily take it from you. And so create that structure months in advance. Know what you have an event in 6 months, know everything that needs to be done in those 6 months so that you can know exactly what you need to do now, today. And as you mentioned, Matt, if I need to do this today, but my lead pastor needs this done right now, okay, well, this needs to go to this spot over here. And he needs to understand that, that trade-off is happening. And so, So then the second resource would be money. And money is always a tricky one. You have to show where money is being pulled from. Hopefully all of our listeners have a budget that they're operating under. And so, if you have a budget that you're overseeing, your lead pastor may be dipping into that budget or he may not. At the same time, you may know. So like for myself, I'm more of a structured, organizational, and detailed guy. And so I know where the money is. And so, I've worked for some very, very 30,000 foot vision leaders, and they come up with some incredible ideas, and they're like, we're going to do this. And everybody's excited and everybody's running. And I'm the one in the corner that says, wait a second, how are we going to pay for that?
Yeah.
And so part of it is knowing how much is it going to cost? And you don't necessarily need to know on the upfront, but when your lead pastor comes and says, hey, I want this done, you need to be able to come back and say, okay, this is what it's going to cost. This really cool thing that we're going to do on Sunday morning, it's going to cost about $1,000. Do we want to spend money on that? And I think that what's important for staff pastors to understand is if your lead pastor is saying, yes, I want to do that, then it's our responsibility to say, okay, then I'll make it happen. It's not our job to decide where the money is spent. But I do think even for how we serve our lead pastors, it's important that we make sure that they understand how much it's going to cost so that it's not a surprise down the road. Lead pastor comes and says, hey, I want this done. And you realize how much it's going to cost and you go ahead and just do it. And then the budget report comes out the next month and he's like, whoa, wait a second, what happened here? And then you're in the position where you have to say, well, but you told me to do this. And that just puts him in a bad position.
Yeah.
so
And I think,
go ahead.
and I think even going back to the give and take that we had with time, I think there's that give and take with finances.
Yes.
So if they're saying, hey, we want every kid to go to camp, money is no issue. And you know that means a couple $100 in scholarships that's going to come out of your fund. And then, fall conference comes in and he says, hey, we want every kid to go to fall conference. Money is no issue. And you say, we already did that for summer camp. We have no money left. And
Right.
You know what I mean?
Where's it going to come from?
I understand. If you have that conversation in the summer saying, hey, we normally give out X amount of scholarships, so we have scholarships available for fall because this is going to come back up in the fall, then as long as they know that give and take is happening and they say, that's fine, we can kind of scoop into the general fund or we can scoop into somewhere else, then as long as that conversation happens on the front end, that's not that awkward conversation that's happening a couple months down the line.
Right. Yep, exactly. And so again, it's not our job to decide where money is spent. It's our job to advise and making sure that everybody understands how much money is going to be spent. And so if the lead pastor says, yeah, that's great, I want to spend it, then we do it. We say, okay, and we make it happen. So the third resource would be talent. And this is probably a harder one for us because nobody likes to admit that I don't have the talent to do it. But I think that it's important because I think a lot of times as staff pastors, we can put ourselves in a position to fail because we're not willing to say, this just is outside of my talent pool. And so, I think one of the things is to make sure that when you are accepting a position, hopefully you're getting a job description. I would say if you're not getting a job description when you're being hired, that should be a red flag right away.
Yeah.
But a lot of churches will put in their job description. There's a nice little tagline at the very end that says something to the effect of, assist in any areas that are needed by the lead pastor or help with whatever else the lead pastor needs. And so basically what that's saying is I'm willing to do anything the lead pastor asks me to do. And I think that it's a dangerous little tagline to have. And in this context, it's because you could be asked to do things that are outside your job description, which means it's outside your talent skill. So let's say, you're hired to be the youth pastor. And just because you're the youth pastor, there's the assumption, oh, you're a good graphic designer. And so, hey, I want you to do these graphics and you're terrible at them. You need to be able to say, I just don't think that's the best service to our church because anything I create is going to embarrass us in public. You need to be able to say that in a way that is not like you're passing the buck or that you're not wanting to do it, but that you're recognizing this just isn't within my talent pool. And so, and part of that is too, you want to manage the quality expectations and even the deadline expectations up front before you even take the task. And so let's say, for like myself, I can do graphics. I'm not great at it. And so if my lead pastor comes to me and says, hey, I want you to do some graphics for me. Okay, I can do that. Just understand you're getting me as your graphic designer. And so you're going to get my level of graphic design. So you're managing those expectations so that he's not expecting, some marketing high quality graphic design coming from me who has really no graphic design experience. So you're managing those expectations and then also managing the deadline because he's not asking a graphic designer to do it, which means it's going to take probably longer than he needs it to. And so managing some of those expectations to make sure that if you do something that's maybe outside of your talent or maybe on the fringe of your talent pool, that you're managing some of those expectations. And I would say if you can, if it is one of those things where it's something for you that's coming your way and you really are going to have to take it, either be okay with outsourcing or even recommending to your lead pastor that you outsource. And let me break this down just a little bit. So let's say your salary is $30,000 for the year and you're working roughly 50 hours a week. And I realize in ministry, we're all over the place on how many hours a week, but let's just say $30,000 a year at 50 hours a week, which means that your time is roughly worth about $12 an hour. Now, when you sit there and you think about the task that's being given to you, could you hire somebody to do it for less than that? because and that would be on the low end. The $12 an hour is on the low end. So if you increase your hours, if you increase your hours at all, then the cost is going to go up even more.
Mm-hmm.
And if you increase your salary, it's going to go up exponentially. And so $12 an hour is probably the low end of what it's going to cost. And so if that's the case, then you have to ask yourself, would it be cheaper to hire someone else to do this? Because my time is worth X. And I just don't know that it's the best stewardship of my time or the money that the church is choosing to pay me in my salary to do this job, when either a volunteer could do it for free or we could hire somebody else to do it at a lower cost. It's just better stewardship.
Absolutely. And one thing that kind of always has stuck out to me is when I was at the Oaks, Mark Brewer said this quote, and I'm going to butcher it, but somewhere along the lines of he never got to a point where he was above stacking chairs, but he also was self-aware enough to realize that that might not always be the best use of his time. And so that's a very big heart issue for a lot of ministers is there's always going to be times where, hey, you need to jump in, you need to be flexible, you need to kind of go with the flow, here and there, that's okay. But also realizing that your time, like you said, is valuable to the point of especially if they're paying you for something, they are paying you to do a job. And so while, yes, there are times where the custodian is out and so someone needs to vacuum the sanctuary.
Right.
But if 50% of your job is doing manual labor and cleaning, and that's not part of your job description, then one, you're either going to increase your hours, which isn't a good idea because then you're not being compensated fairly, or two, you're not doing what you're being paid to do. And you're not above it, you're not better than it, but you are also put in that position for a specific reason. And like you said, like there are people on, there are a ton of websites where you can pay someone $20 to make a quick logo or something like that. And they can do it in one day and I can take 5 minutes to tell them what I need and pay them $20 and it's done, versus it takes me an entire day that now all of these other meetings I had with students and sermon prep and all this other sort of stuff is now pushed down when I could have just taken 5 minutes and $20 to delegate that. And so it's not that you're above it, but you're also empowering other people to do it and then using your time most effectively.
Well, and it's a question of stewardship. I think that's really what I want us to get across here, that it's a question of how you're stewarding not only your time, but the finances of the church and what people are giving for you to help spiritually develop and grow the church as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so we've kind of narrowed it in on, okay, there are times where it's okay to say no. Now the words need to come out of your mouth. So how do you know how to say no? So when you actually have to communicate, you've decided, okay, I don't have the time, I don't have the money, I don't have the resources, I don't have the talent, whatever that might be. How do you now say this to your superior? How do you now say this to your lead? One of the first things that you have to do is you need to articulate with a valid reason why you are saying no. Kind of going back to kind of our bad examples, maybe that's something that we could have done better, is maybe articulate a good reason why you're saying no. So once again, going up to, you don't have the talent, you don't have the money, you don't have the time. And explaining that not in a, well, I'm just not going to do it, or no, I'm not going to do it, but saying why you can't do it and making sure it's a valid reason. Another reason is knowing when the right time to say no is. Just knowing maybe in the heat of the moment or maybe after a meeting. So let's say you're sitting in a staff meeting and someone just offhand says, oh yeah, you can take care of that. Maybe now is not the time to kind of formulate like why you can't say no, but maybe after that meeting, pull them aside and say, hey, I know that you said that you wanted me to do this, and then kind of go through the motions, but knowing when is the right time to say no. And then also using those no's sparingly and trying to say no as little as possible. And then one thing that we've talked about this in previous episodes is I am a people pleaser. And I feel like a lot of people in ministry they feel like I'm physically capable of doing the task, so I should say yes.
Right.
Even if it means you're going to have to work long hours and you're going to have to sacrifice family time, or you're going to have to sacrifice your own ministry stuff, you're going to do that because the pastor wants you to do it. But one thing I would say is don't agree to something that you are not going to do. If you know in your brain you do not have time for it, if you know in your brain you are not capable of doing it, but maybe you can patchwork something together and figure it out, do not agree to something that you're not going to do, because what that's doing is that's just double setting you up for failure. Because one, in a week's time when it's due, your lead is going to come to you and say, hey, how's that graphic coming? Hey, did you make those phone calls? And if you know that you're not going to do it, and then you say, well, I didn't really have the time, all that's going to do is say, well, you told me that you did. Why was this not a thing before? And so do not agree to something that you're not going to do. If you know you're not going to do it, it's better just to, it might be uncomfortable. It might be a little bit icky. It might cause a little bit of tension, but the tension is vastly smaller than if you wait a week and then they have to follow up and say, hey, why didn't this get done?
Right.
And you could have had that conversation earlier.
Right. Well, and to go with that too, because as you said, many times those of us in ministry, we get into ministry because we like to help people. We like to be there for them. For better or for worse, we do tend to be people pleasers. But at the same time, it's important in any leadership role, but especially when you're dealing with your superiors or your lead pastor, your direct report, it's okay to be tactfully direct. And I'll speak just from my own perspective. I think that, for those who I've worked for, there's a level where they may not always like me being direct, and I haven't always been tactful at it. But at the same time, they know what they're going to get from me, because I'm going to be direct and I'm going to tell you exactly what I think and how I feel and what, where I'm landing on this. And again, though I may be abrasive at times, at the end of the day, my direct reports or my superiors know, my lead pastor knows, this is what you're going to get. If I don't think I can do it, I'm going to tell you I can't do it. At the same time, when I look back to when I have reports to me, people who are working for me and coming to me, I don't want people beating around the bush. I don't want people who are going to, like you said, say they're going to do it and then not do it. Like it becomes more work for me to manage. I would rather you just be direct. Just tell me if you don't like the idea, or you don't think it's, you're going to be able to do it, then just tell me on the upfront, and we can navigate. Either we can figure out somebody else to do it, we can figure out a new thing to do, or we can just work a way for you to get it done. It's always better to be direct, just because it clarifies communication. And when you're talking about leadership and relationship both, communication is huge. And so the key to that, the trick is to learn to be tactful in being direct. Being direct can be abrasive, it can be harsh. And so if you're not tactful about it, then it can hurt feelings. It can, push people back a little bit. And from your lead pastor, you may get some not so great responses if you're not tactful in being direct. But I think if you're tactfully direct, your lead pastor is going to appreciate that, because your lead pastor knows what they're getting and where you're landing and what's going on. And so if you're not a direct person naturally, then work on being direct. And if you are a direct person, then work on being tactful, because it's a huge skill when it comes to being able to say no to things that you are just not able to do. So yeah, just learn to be tactfully direct. It's a huge skill, and you'll appreciate having it. So Matt, any final thoughts as we wrap up this episode?
Yeah, I really just want to kind of double down on the whole, it's okay to say no. I feel like that's something I wish I would have known earlier in ministry. I wish I would still to this day do better at. I think that sometimes, especially on a spiritual level, I think that sometimes we try to put too much on our own shoulders. We look at something and we say, I could probably do that, and so I'm going to make myself uncomfortable or go drive myself to a point that's unhealthy to get that accomplished. And once again, we want to be flexible. We want to be a team player. All of those sort of things are good. But at the same time, we also need to understand that God has put a healthy rhythm that we need to find in our life with our families, with our ministries, with our rest. All these sort of things need to be in a healthy rhythm. And to do that, we need to be able to say no, even to good ideas, even to things that we can accomplish, even to reasonable asks. And I think that the more that we can say no to things in a healthy way, in a productive way, whether that's through delegation, whether that's just through good time management. Hey, I can't do that today, but I can do that next week.
Right.
The better that our pastors and our leaders will realize that we're doing things with excellence because we are well rested, because we are putting proper time and effort and energy and talent into things. Mm-hmm. And so saying no isn't necessarily always a negative thing, but sometimes saying no to some things sets you up to saying yes to the right things.
Right.
And so we just want to constantly say that it's okay to say no in the proper way.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think I would wrap up with kind of coming back to being in ministry, being staff pastors, or being pastors in general. You know, we're called to follow Jesus's model of servant leadership. And I think that, you know, wrapped up in servant leadership can be this idea that we are not allowed to say no, that we're expected to always say yes. And I would say that that's an unhealthy perspective on what servant leadership is. As we started the episode, we said it's really never a good idea to say no to your lead pastor, but we do have to find ways to say no without saying no. And it's, as you mentioned, Matt, it's not because, you know, we want to be rebellious or be contrary to what our lead pastor is wanting us to do. It's more about just setting ourselves up in a position where we can say yes to the right things. We can say no to things that probably, you know, are not in our wheelhouse or not going to serve the church the best. But coming down to, we want to have a servant's heart. We want to serve our lead pastor in every way we possibly can. And sometimes serving our lead pastor means helping him or her understand that this just isn't the best thing for me to do right now, with either the time, the resources, my talent pool, whatever. And so it's not a good idea to say no to your lead. But at the same time, sometimes the best thing you can do to serve your lead is to find a way to say no to whatever they're asking you to do. It's tricky. It's challenging. There's lots of nuances and layers to it, but it's a skill. I think that almost any seasoned pastor will say they wish they would have learned how to do it earlier on, because they would have saved themselves as well as their lead pastors and their congregation a lot of heartache, because they would have learned how to say it earlier. And so, so this is a tough topic, Matt.
Mm-hmm.
Even as we're going through it, it's tough, because even as we're going through it, I'm thinking about our listeners, and I'm thinking about kind of how they're processing and, you know, the questions that may be coming up. And as we mentioned, we're going to probably come back to this several times. Our next episode, we're going to go a little bit deeper and talk about how to say no, you know, when your lead pastor asks you to do something unreasonable, asks you to do something that's maybe a bad idea, or maybe asks you to do something that's going to land you in jail. And none of us want to be there.
No, thank you. I've been watching 60 Days In, and I never want to commit another. I'm never jaywalking again in my life.
Right. Yeah. Scary. Yeah. So, you know, but the unfortunate part is we say that jokingly, but you and I both know people who have ended up there, mm-hmm. Just because they, for whatever reason, didn't feel like they could say no. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we just want to make sure that we are equipping all of our listeners with Mind the Gap with everything possible. And I think being able to say no is a huge piece. And so our next episode, we're going to go a little bit deeper, a little bit more of a tougher element to the say no motif. And it'll be interesting. So we will see you at our next episode. I hope that you're able to take this, apply it to your day-to-day ministry, hopefully even build a better relationship with your lead pastor by being able to say no. I know that may seem like a difficult thing, but I think it will. You can build a better relationship with your lead pastor by learning to say no. So we will see you at our next episode. If you know a ministry leader looking to grow and take their ministry to the next level, please share this podcast with them. Go deeper by joining us on Facebook under I Will Mind the Gap, where you can ask questions that we can answer in future episodes. Remember to subscribe to the podcast, rate it, and share it. Until next time, remember to mind the gap of your ministry.